Hello everyone, I am Uriah Heep, and welcome to the Great American Novel Series brought to you by the Author's Matrix. On tonight's episode, we'll be going on to Chapter 11 of our new book called The Village Idiot by Dan Blanchfield. As you recall in Chapter 10, Addison Way got waylaid by the Crumbly Village Times. They wrecked him. They broke him, or did they? Chapter 11, though, we go back to the very beginning, to Nigel Crumbly and his family. We'll pick up the story we left off many chapters ago. So sit back, relax, take a visit to the past with the Crumbly family, with Chapter 11.
Chapter 11. Nigel Crumbly was now a young adult, having survived his childhood, and Edith and Jonah were exceedingly grateful. He was their only child who made his way to adulthood. The family lost little Annie 10 years ago, and while she was gone, she was not forgotten. Jonah had erected a shrine to his little angel in the main room of their modest house shortly after her passing, and never removed it to this day. In the intervening decade since Annie's passing, Jonah and Edith survived, albeit barely. They both took turns with serious health issues, each presenting themselves on death's door more than once. Nigel, however, had somehow remained relatively healthy and was now in his third year at the university. Jonah and Edith had sacrificed enormously to enable Nigel to study. He was a bright young man and took his education with the utmost seriousness. He had spent his childhood watching his father grind away, providing for his family, and was determined not to follow in his footsteps. As Nigel returned home one early afternoon, having completed his classes for the day, he found his mother stretched out on the couch, breathing heavily. He moved closer and nudged her on the shoulder, but she failed to respond. He surmised that his mother was exhausted, as per custom, and was resting, so he let her along. After grabbing a late lunch, Nigel took off to explore the highlands again. This was his favourite activity, which he pursued with vigour at every opportunity. He was to become a biologist one day, and felt that his time spent studying the natural world in the highlands was the most important use of his time he could imagine. This afternoon, he plunged further into the wilds than he had before. He stopped at a babbling stream to rest, as the hike up the hill tired him. Although he was healthier than his parents, having consumed raw sewage water all of his life had taken its toll on him, as it had on everyone else. He was nearly free of the sores consuming his parents, save one rather large on the back of his head. It was still open and oozing despite repeated visits to the doctor and the treatments performed regularly. The family physician for Nigel's family remained Dr. Atterbury, who was to this day the doctor of choice for many in the village of Crumbly. He often visited and lanced Nigel's sore, cleansing it with the raw sewer water in the trench across their residence. As Nigel lay down in the tall grass astride the stream, he heard a splash in the distance. There was abundant wildlife in the highlands, so he gave it nary another thought, but then heard it again and again. His curiosity was now piqued, and as he revelled in observing the wild animals that populated the hills, he decided to make his way downstream to take a look. The splashing sounds continued, and the closer he got to the source, the less likely it was some wild animal. It had a regular rhythm, which suggested a being of higher intelligence. Nigel had explored these hills hundreds of times over the past decade and had never encountered another human being, so he thought it highly unlikely that would change now. He stealthily rounded the last curve in the stream, only to see an older man, who Nigel figured must be in his 6th decade, splashing and frolicking in the chilly highland water. The old man was dressed in nothing more than a swimming suit as he immersed himself in the water. Aside from the greying hair, the man in the stream seemed to be in remarkable and robust health for a resident of the village of Crumbly at any age, much less someone as old as he appeared. Nigel stood nearby, crouching behind a large bushy plant, furtively observing the old man. He knew how cold these waters could be, and could only imagine the torment he must be suffering. However, there was no indication that the old man was suffering. His joy in this exercise was palpable. There was a broad smile on his face as he repeatedly plunged underwater, only to re-emerge with a resounding splash, whipping the frigid waters from his hair with a furious back-and-forth head motion. Who could this remarkably old man be? Wondered Nigel. So few villagers had survived into old age. If they did, they were typically emaciated and covered with sores. Yet this old man appeared to be free of any evidence of the disease and rot that plagued everyone else in the village of Crumbly. Nigel left the stream and returned home, not having the courage to approach the elderly man in the water. On the way home, he wondered how someone of such an advanced age in the village of Crumbly, or anywhere else, could be enjoying so obviously good health at his age. He had known plenty of people in the village growing up, and nearly everyone showed a marked decline in overall health once they passed their 4th decade, if they did. His parents were, of course, no exception. As he approached his house, Nigel remembered how his mum was slumped in a chair, breathing heavily when he arrived home from the university. After seeing that miracle man in the Highland stream, he suddenly began to worry about his mum. He cursed himself for not having made a better attempt at rousing her this afternoon to assure himself that she was okay. As he approached his house, Nigel saw his father standing in the middle of the sewer trench across the street, scooping the raw sewage with an oversized bucket. It was apparent to Nigel that his father was careful to gather the very best sewage from the centre of the trench, where the most fecal matter would logically settle, given the laws of physics. This sighting portended something ominous to Nigel. It was custom in the Crumbly household for himself to gather the necessary raw sewage for his family's daily needs in the morning, which he did dutifully every morning, including this one. So, why was his father gathering even more sewage? Nigel waited down the street until his father entered the house, carrying the bucket of sewage water. After his father was safely in the house and the door was shut, he made his way to the front door. Instead of bursting in as per his custom, Nigel gingerly pried the front door open and crept in, making no sound. The front room of their decrepit house was dark and quiet, which only roused more nervousness in Nigel. His mum was no longer sitting in the lone chair where he had left her this afternoon, and there was no sign of his father, save the spilled raw sewage that had dripped from the bucket as his father entered the house. Nigel followed the trail of sewage, which led to his parents' bedroom. Having assessed the situation, Nigel realised that his mum was ill yet again. He heard murmurs from the bedroom after momentarily pausing in the front room. He recognised the sound of his father's voice, but the other voice was a mystery. The sounds were too muffled to make out the other individual's identity. Nigel finally gathered the courage, slowly walked back to the bedroom door, and peered inside. He saw his father sitting beside his mum and Dr. Atterbury, busily lancing a large sore on her shoulder. No one saw Nigel, and he made no sound. "This is what Edith needs now," Dr. Atterbury said, as he dug his lance deep into her shoulder. She winced but did not cry out. Nigel could smell the stench from the open wound clear across the room and felt nauseous. Unable to enter his parents' bedroom given the circumstances, Nigel took to the outside to remove himself from the smell that had overwhelmed him. It took a few minutes, but his head cleared and his nausea subsided enough for him to enter the house. As he swung open the front door, he was met by Dr. Atterbury, who, having finished attending to Nigel's mum, was now leaving to perform the same procedure at another residence down the street. "Hello, Nigel," Dr. Atterbury said as he brushed past Nigel. Nigel did not respond, and the doctor swiftly brushed past him. Nigel reasoned that if the doctor was leaving, his mum's health must have been adequately restored, thus relieving his anxiety, and he proceeded to join his parents in their bedroom. Jonah turned as he heard Nigel enter the room. "Come sit next to your mum, Nigel," Jonah gently commanded his son. Nigel obeyed without hesitation and sat down beside his mum. The confidence that Nigel had only moments ago that his mum was likely recovering vanished as he drew closer to her. It was true that Dr. Atterbury had lanced the massive sore on her shoulder, but she looked weaker and gaunter than only hours ago when he had seen her resting in the chair. "Your mum is quite ill, Nigel," Jonah said haltingly. "She's had a bad run with the sore on her shoulder. The doctor did all he could, but now it's up to God to restore her health." Nigel sat stunned by his father's words. He always knew his mum's health was precarious at best, but he was unprepared for a rapid decline. Nigel thought about how this was life in the village of Crumbly. Everyone seemed to veer in and out of serious illness. This ebb and flow of life and death was everyone's fate, and was not confined to the elderly and infirmed. Nigel reached forward and took his mum's hand in his. Edith turned her head, looked at her only remaining son, and smiled. She could not speak now, but the smile reassured him. "Your mum needs rest, son," Jonah said as he attempted to suppress an outward sign of distress over the health of his lovely wife. "She needs to drink whatever raw sewage water we can give her, Nigel. The doctor recommended giving her sips every hour or so, depending on how she tolerates it." Jonah and Nigel left the room and sat down in the kitchen. Neither could eat, so they just sat silently. As they sat, Nigel's thoughts turned to that miracle man he saw in the highlands earlier in the day. He could not stop thinking about how healthy a man in his advanced years looked. He had never seen anyone in his life that evidenced the robust health of that stranger. He looked at his bedraggled father sitting across from him. Jonah was dirty and unkempt after a day's work, but it did not bother Nigel so much. Indeed, his father has had a difficult life working with his hands at manual labour jobs, which has taken its toll on his being. It was not that. Like his mum's, the overall deterioration of his health struck Nigel so profoundly. At that moment, Nigel determined that he was returning to the highlands tomorrow and trying to find that miracle man again. This is certainly in the field of biology, thought Nigel as he planned his route up into the highlands. He tried to remember the exact paths that took him to that stream, but as he had never walked that way before as he had the other day, remembering it proved difficult. "I will sit up with your mum tonight," Jonah said to his son, who did not hear him, being lost in a reverie thinking about tomorrow's journey. The following morning, Nigel set out for the highlands before his father woke. He had quietly peeked in to see how his mum was doing, and it appeared that her condition was unchanged from last night, so he felt that leaving her at this time was justified. True to his word, his father remained at his mother's side throughout the night. However, exhaustion had overwhelmed him, and he was fast asleep. It was about an hour's hike before Nigel had reached the peak of the highlands where he had visited yesterday. He was well versed in exploration and had a keen sense of direction. So even though he had only traversed this area once in his life, he felt it was familiar enough that he found the stream after wandering the area for the better part of an hour. He stood at the point in the stream where the miracle man had bathed, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was quiet and peaceful, the silence only broken by the water in front of him curling around impediments at the bottom of the gently moving waters. If the miracle man is not here today, certainly he must live somewhere near here, Nigel reasoned to himself. The man was not carrying any heavy possessions, so his residence cannot be far from this very spot. That logical deduction impelled Nigel to begin a hunt of the surrounding hills in search of the miracle man, which he commenced without delay. He used the sun overhead and definite markers in the highlands to scour the area without getting lost. This trek went on for a couple of hours, before Nigel remembered that not only had he foregone breakfast in his haste to return to the highlands, but neither had he brought any provisions with him. With hunger and thirst getting the better, he rested underneath a large tree that stood alone at the edge of a thinly forested area and fell fast asleep. "Son?" a stranger said as he gently poked Nigel in the shoulder to rouse him. Fighting off hunger and exhaustion, Nigel opened his eyes and saw the miracle man hovering over him, studying him closely, looking for signs of life. "Are you all right, son?" the stranger said as he saw Nigel open his eyes and squint. Nigel was still determining if he was still in a dream state, or if the person he sought was speaking to him. He rubbed his eyes and mouthed, "I am all right, sir," and closed his eyes again. When Nigel awoke again, some 3 hours later, he was lying on a soft bed in a cabin. He was disoriented and confused. The last thing he remembered was finding the stream and resting. Now, he was alone in this cabin he had never seen before, and began to think he was still dreaming. He looked around the cabin, which was just one room, simple, essential, and meant to accommodate one person only. A nightstand and an empty glass were next to the bed he was lying on. At least that was what Nigel thought as he attempted to focus his attention. The glass appeared empty at first glance, but now he thought he saw something that had no colour and barely any form within the glass. He stared at it momentarily, and the front door swung open. The miracle man appeared and smiled at Nigel. "I see you are awake, son," he said in the kindest possible way. "You were dehydrated when I found you this morning. I brought you here to my cabin." Nigel tried to sit up but found it challenging. "You just rest a bit, son," the stranger said, "and take some more water. I've been waking you every hour to get you to drink a bit so you can regain your strength. This is the first time it appears that you are awake and alert. That is good." The stranger sat beside the bed and reached for the glass on the nightstand. Nigel was now sufficiently awake to understand what was going on around him. As the stranger lifted the glass, Nigel's quizzical look forced the stranger to hesitate. "Oh, this?" the stranger said and smiled. "This is fresh water for you." "This isn't water, sir," Nigel said as he gently pushed the glass away. "I am still parched, sir, and I require water. Do you not have any fresh sewer water I could drink?" "This is the freshest water available, son," the miracle man said without hesitation. "That sewer water you drink is akin to poison." Nigel stared at the stranger sitting next to him for at least a minute, as if he did not understand the statement. It was as if the miracle man spoke a foreign language. When Nigel was offered the drink a second time, he froze. "My name is Addison Way. And what is your name, son?" Addison said, as he withdrew the offer of water and placed the glass on the table next to the bed. "Nigel, sir," he responded. "Nigel Crumbly, sir." "Well, welcome, Nigel," Addison said in the most considerate way. "What brings you so far up into the highlands?" Now, Nigel felt embarrassed. He had come to search out this miracle man and found him in the least auspicious way. "I was hiking, sir," Nigel said meekly. "Well, I don't see many hikers up this far in the highlands, so it was a surprise finding you sitting by my favourite stream. Crumbly, are you related to the founding fathers of the village?" "Yes, sir," Nigel replied. "It was my great-great, or I don't know how many greats, grandfather, sir." "I know the history very well, Nigel," Addison said. "You have quite a lineage." As Addison spoke, Nigel found himself staring at him. When he first encountered him at the stream and saw him from a distance, he was struck by the apparent robust health he enjoyed. He had never seen anyone, regardless of their age, with such a healthy glow about them. The miracle man had no open sores or evidence that he had ever had sores. While Nigel was healthier than most young adults his age, he suffered from the usual sores, vomiting, diarrhea, and blinding headaches like everyone else. He was one of the fortunate ones. Now that he saw Addison up close, he was stunned by the man's health. "Why do you call it water, sir?" Nigel asked. "If there is nothing there." Addison smiled and picked up the glass of water once again. "It is pure water, Nigel. It has been purified, and all the elements, not water, have been removed. It is quite safe to drink. It is the only water we should all be drinking." Upon making that statement, Addison poured himself another glass of water and drank it fully in front of Nigel, who winced. "But there is no fecal matter in the water, sir," Nigel replied. "How can you call it pure?" "I know this is shocking, Nigel," Addison tried to explain, "but the raw sewage water that everyone in the world uses to quench their collective thirsts, bathe in and cook with, is poison to the system. The whole world needs to change their thinking here, Nigel." Nigel sat thinking about what this miracle man had just said. It was preposterous, Nigel concluded. For the first time, his wonder at this man's health changed into the feeling that he might be dangerously mentally ill. "I ought not argue with a crazy person," Nigel thought, and immediately began to plan his escape from this cabin, lest this individual attempt to keep him here against his will. "I should be going now, sir," Nigel said hesitantly as he began to stand up. The fresh, pure water that Addison had been giving him in drips over the past few hours had sufficiently reduced his dehydration to the point that Nigel did feel better. "So be it, Nigel," Addison said in the most non-threatening way. He could sense the unease among the young man sitting before him. He was used to people reacting in such a manner when he brought up the subject of water, and Nigel proved to be no exception. Nigel was on his feet now and bid Addison farewell. He tried desperately to avoid eye contact with him as he made his way to the door. He had read once in his university psychology class that it could be dangerous to look a crazy person directly in the eye, and he was afraid that it might raise some ire in the so-called miracle man if he made that mistake. "Thank you again, sir," Nigel said as he brushed past Addison and made his way out of the cabin that he had feared only moments ago might become his prison. As he trudged down the highlands towards his parents' house, Nigel found himself conflicted beyond any logic. He made his way past the stream where he first witnessed the miracle man, and thought about how taken he was by the fact that this man showed no signs of the ill health that plagued everyone he had ever known or met. Perhaps this man was just fortunate in life, Nigel told himself as he went home. No one has such robust health as that man. It is not possible. And this utter nonsense about water somehow being the solution to humanity's health issues was equally absurd to the young biologist. At his age, he should surely be dead by now, but he is not. The walk home was long, and Nigel needed to realize how far into the highlands he had traversed today and grew fatigued. He stopped every half hour to rest under the shade of a tree and thought maybe the water this man had forced upon him weakened him now. Was I poisoned? Nigel thought to himself, and he began to shudder at the thought. Perhaps I was taken in by this charlatan, and he plied me with his pure water to do away with me. Nigel's imagination began to accelerate at a rapid rate, and he convinced himself that he might have, indeed, been poisoned by this lunatic. He jumped up and raced home as swiftly as his weakened body could. When he finally reached home, it was dark, and the house was quiet. He slipped into his room, unnoticed by his parents, and fell fast asleep, hoping by the time he awoke that it was all a nightmare, and he was still alive.
So, young Nigel Crumbly goes up to the highlands, meets Addison Way. His life is about to change. That concludes Chapter 11. Join us next time for Chapter 12 of The Village Idiot. Meanwhile, goodbye, good luck, and we'll see you next time on the Great American Novel Series. I am Uriah Heep, and this is my Literary Cafe. Good night.